But good morning. So I honestly struggled with evangelism for a while. Even after I'd answered the call to preach. I know that's hard to imagine, me not being able to speak to somebody probably. If you've known me for any time, that you know that quietness is not my strength. But I struggled with talking to other people about Jesus or about what Jesus was doing in my life. Some would say it's kind of a private thing, or maybe it was a head thing, or just the way that we live, the way that we talk. But in my house, you don't talk about your problems. That was the way I was raised. Your problems are your problems. They stay there, and you talk about the good things in public. You fix the problems, but you don't talk about them. But then when you are supposed to be telling other people about Jesus, if you tell someone your testimony, you're supposed to do what? Tell them where your problems were and how God helped you. So I struggled with it for a while, for a long while actually, and there's just so many things to it. It's really awkward, right? I mean, you walk up to a stranger, hey, do you know Jesus? Or, there's some really confrontational ones where people will do it, or there's some really, private ones. There's 3 different kinds of evangelism. They may be called by different names, but pretty much most experts will agree there's 3 kinds. So with those 3, the first one is called contact. So basically, I see you at the gas station, hey, I want to invite you to church. That's contact evangelism. The other one's context. And that's like, we're flying somewhere, you go to get on an airplane, and you're sitting next to a total stranger, and you end up talking about Jesus. That would be a context, because they're kind of stuck with you on an airplane or a bus, or you meet them, you kind of go that way, but they're not a friend, and it's more than a contact. Because a contact is, a moment, you leave. And then the third one, and I hear it called many different things, especially this one, but it's friendship evangelism. That's, hey, we're friends, this is my lifestyle, this is your lifestyle. But you're able to grow closer with friends, and hopefully you're able to be honest with friends, right? that's what you hope. Friendship evangelism is actually what got me into the church. I had friends that basically, by the way they lived, and then also inviting me occasionally, got me to come. And I knew, and what was funny though, it wasn't an immediate invite that got me to come to the church. I was doing stupid stuff on a Saturday night, not drinking or anything, but it was snow and doing donuts on a school parking lot. Cops showed up, other people took off, I was there. And if anyone has ever had to call their dad at 3 in the morning, and then, you kind of have that fear. So I wasn't, I pretty much, my dad didn't wake up, but, I wanted to be an honest kid, so cop gave me the card, tell your dad this is why you called him at 3 in the morning. I didn't get a ticket, I wasn't in trouble, but, don't do this again or you will be in trouble next time kind of talk. So I put the card at the kitchen table. My dad sits when he gets up, when he's drinking his coffee and eating breakfast. And I remember thinking, well, this is going to be interesting. So I'm in my room. I didn't sleep because I don't know if you've ever had one of those conversations. You don't really sleep because whoa, I'm going to be in trouble. And it was somewhere in that time when I'm laying there at 5, 6 in the morning awake before my dad's gotten up, I'm thinking, I need to go back to church. And, I need to stop doing stupid things and getting in trouble because it'll just get worse. And I remember my friends inviting me and telling me, you should come. So I went that next Wednesday night. I didn't go that Sunday because I was tired after not sleeping all morning or all night, however you want to say it. But I didn't go that morning, but I went that Wednesday night, and that's what changed it for me. So evangelism has different things, and I think sometimes the word evangelism has a negative connotation because it just seems so unnatural. So you can just say inviting someone to church or telling someone about Jesus, but how many here really enjoy that awkwardness? Anybody enjoy that awkwardness in telling someone, walking up to a complete stranger and being like, hi? Anyone enjoy that? Let's start with, who likes talking to a stranger? Anybody? And James is like, maybe, I'll talk to a stranger. I'll talk to a stranger. But then you just walk up to a total stranger with no background and be like, because there's some, like I said, I've been taught some that were really pushy. Do you know Jesus? This is this. You got to make a decision now. That's not what I'm talking about this morning. So just, you can relax a little bit. I'm not talking about getting out and, beating people over the head with the Bible. Because, I don't think that would go very well. I don't know about you, but books hurt. And Bible's usually pretty thick, so it can hurt a lot. But there's a few reasons why inviting someone to church or telling people about Jesus is important. So I have a couple of studies I want to share information from. And I love numbers, so if you don't like numbers, ignore it. And don't think about the number, but think about the individual people that it's talking about. Because I know some people do not like math. And this is like, I don't want to do math on Sunday. So I'll do the math for you. Just follow along. A study in 2016 was done, and it surveyed 2,000 people. That's quite a lot of people, 2,000 people. It was done at random, male, female, different backgrounds, different countries even. And what that study showed, and it was in the North America region, it wasn't going in Europe, but what that study showed was that 72% of people feel loneliness. And when we double check my number on this one I always forget, 31% of people feel loneliness on a regular basis. And I think that's easy to say that out of the people here, it would be feasible to say that a third of us have felt loneliness, or 2/3 of us have felt loneliness, and a third of us have felt loneliness on a weekly basis, at least at some point in our life. So part of it is that side. Just another good statistic is there was another study done in 2015, and it was asking people how satisfied they were with their life. 3 out of 10 said they were satisfied. They were happy with where they were. They were, life is good, 3 out of 10. Only 3 out of 10. If I went through the room, only, 6 or 9 of us would say, yeah, I'm happy with my life. And even more startling than that is 4 out of 10, which is greater than people that were happy, 4 out of 10 were completely dissatisfied with their life. Not just, I'm not where I want to be, it's I'm completely dissatisfied with where I'm at. The reason that that's important is because I believe one of the best things that can help that is here. Loneliness, struggles, issues, God, Jesus can help. And I think one of the biggest commands and one of the biggest parts of the church is to be the hands and feet of God. We're supposed to be the ones that love, we're supposed to be the ones that reach, we're supposed to be the ones that lead to Jesus. But if we don't, then there's people that are lonely. With those same statistics, if we apply that to within 3 miles of this church, only 3 miles, that means that there are over 10,000 people who feel loneliness every week. 10,880 feel loneliness every week. If we apply that same statistic of how many are dissatisfied with their life, totally dissatisfied, it is 8,370 within 3 miles of here. I think most of us can agree that we probably we drive more than 3 miles on a regular basis. I know I don't live in that 3-mile circle because I live in Mount Branson. I'm like 6 miles. So slightly further, but you can imagine 8,000 people who are totally dissatisfied with their life. 10,000 people and they could possibly be facing the same thing. So I think it's reasonable to say that some of us have gone through this. I know I have had times in my life where I struggle. When you don't know what to do, like when you lost your job, it's hard to say you're satisfied with your life. I know when I was laid off from my work and then I ended up finding work in another company, those 8 or 9 months in that time frame, I wasn't happy with where I was. Because if you've ever had to live paycheck to paycheck, or if you still do, you know that it's a struggle. It's even more of a struggle when you don't know where that paycheck's coming from. When you're like, unemployment barely pays my bills, like what can I do? So you're working a little extra on the side here and there just trying to make it. When your car breaks down, when this happens or that happens, you don't have the money to fix it. So I know I wasn't happy with where I was at that time. And I think that's why it's so important for us to understand the need for us to reach others, for us to tell people about Jesus, because while it may be slightly uncomfortable for us, it's even more uncomfortable for them. I mean, if you really think about it, if Do you like being where you feel lonely? And one of the best places where you can feel like a community and a family is at church. I've been in larger churches, I've been in smaller churches, and there's something about you go somewhere and you feel like you can let your guard down, and these people actually care about you. You're with people that are like family. So I think that's one of the important things that we can see and that we can see with it. And it's because we're called to bring God's love to others. And our vision, our mission of our church is to reach, redeem, revive. It's reach with the love of God, redeem, if I can even talk, redeem through the blood and grace of Jesus Christ, and then revive lives through the power of the Holy Spirit. Of those three things, you know which one we can do? Can you redeem lives? Can you bring redemption to people, bring them? Can you revive them? If you're a doctor and nurse, maybe that's a different kind of revival. But a spiritual revival, I can't do either of those, but I can reach. I can talk to others. I can show them who Jesus is by simply loving them and, being a decent human being. I know that sounds like kind of cliche, but most people, there was a statistic that came out a few years ago that said 80% of people that didn't go to church said they would come to church if someone invited them, eventually. I think our problem is how many of us get discouraged if we invite someone and they don't come. We're like, well, they didn't come this week. They said they were going to come and they didn't come, so I'm not going to say anything about it. Sometimes it's just being persistent. Also, there's that same thing where they don't do it, so then you stop talking to them. That doesn't help it either. So we are called to bring God's love to others. That's those within 3 miles, 10 miles, 30 miles across the world. It's to share love. We have 18, 19 people from our district, our Nazarene district, with about 80, 90 churches that are in Australia right now, who are bringing God's love to another side of the world. They left Friday, they got there last night, and that's a very long day of travel. But they got there, and they're going to be there for 14, 15 days, and it's 12 teenagers and 6 adults, I think, and they're going over there and doing that across the world. So it's one of those things, if we can do it across the world, we can do it in our own backyard. We can bring God's love to others. The scripture we're looking at today is one of those really famous scriptures. Everyone knows John 3:16. I joke around about it a lot. You see it at football games. It's on signs. They're holding it up. It's on TV. Celebrities that know nothing about God could probably quote part of John 3:16 to people. Non-Christians could probably tell you what John 3:16 is roughly, just because, especially in this area, we have heard it and we have seen it. But we don't really know the scripture around John 3:16 or right before it. So coming up to this, John chapter 2, a couple really good things happen. Jesus' first miracle. One of those things that people like to point out a lot where Jesus gets a little crazy is right before this in chapter 2 is when he goes into the temple. He makes ropes into a whip and he's chasing people out and turning over tables. That happens right before this. And then just in the same chapter, he's having a conversation with Nicodemus. And this is where the phrase that born again comes from. It's with his conversation with Nicodemus. He was someone who was a religious ruler of his time. And he had part of Jesus' burial and where he left. So that's part of who Nicodemus is in the story there. And all those things lead up to this conversation. And it's part of that conversation with Nicodemus that Jesus says this. So we'll go ahead and start in verse 16. And it says, "For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him." One thing within that verse 16 that I want to point out, because I think we always talk about, God sent his one and only, right? The one and only, or if you're like me and you grew up on the King James Version of the Bible, it's the begotten. That's the way I still remember the verse, is the King James Version. But the word used there, one and only in Greek, is called monogenes. And it actually does not just mean one and only. It means one of a kind. And I think that's important because it wasn't that it was just his one and only Son. It was his one of a kind Son, his unique Son. So I think it just brings a little more power to what he's saying there. And I also believe that applies to us because being the one of a kind is the way that God created us, that no two of us are the same. But within that same vein, we are his family. If you've been accepted into Christ's blood and through his sacrifice, we have been given that. And it's because of he was one of a kind that we have that opportunity. And then in verse 18, moving forward still, there is no judgment against anyone who believes in him, but anyone who does not believe in him has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son, his one-of-a-kind Son. And the judgment is based on this fact. God's light came into the world. He's talking about Jesus. God's light came into the world, but people loved the darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. All who do evil hate the light and refuse to go near it, for fear their sins will be exposed. But those who do what is right come to the light so others can see that they are doing what God wants. So a few things just to break down in those verses that we can look at and we can see is that when it's talking about evil, it doesn't mean as in evil as, like, I think when we think of evil, at least when I think of evil, I think of cartoons and I think of the bad guy. Right? They're the evil ones, you're trying to fight them and you're trying to overcome. That's where we see that term evil the most. You think of evil, you think of Hitler. You think of, this is evil. The people that do atrocities and terrible things throughout history and around the world. Those are the people we think of as evil. The word, what they're using when they're describing evil is people who commit sin. It's not just the evil as in evil, like I said, we think of this big, terrible person, but it's sin. It's living in sin, because those who live in sin do not want to go near the light, because they don't want the light to expose their sin. So that's what they're describing there, and that's where all of us work. For me, I didn't want to go to church because I didn't really know if I believed in the church. If I didn't really, I had the same questions everyone has. If God is real, then why does this happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is it that it seems like only the good die young? Why do these things happen? Those were the things I was wondering. But I didn't want to go to the church because if I'm having doubts, I'm having issues, I don't want to be near where the light is. I didn't want to be around those who have the light. And the first thing I want us to see from 16 through 21 is that it's sharing God's love. Because I think we think of it as this is what we have to do, and I've seen so many people when they go to tell people about God, instead of sharing God's love with them, they share their sin with them. You do this, you do this, you do this, and you're a terrible human being. I've seen that. I grew up in a small town, so maybe it's a little bit different, but it was always about this is who you are, and this is what you need to do. But if we're sharing God's love with people, I think that you'll see, for one, it's easier. For two, if it really is involved with your life, it changes you. Because God's love isn't something that's fleeting, it's going. And maybe you're one of the people we talked about that was struggling with depression or struggling with loneliness or struggling with being unhappy with life. You're not alone. God's love is for you. Even where you are in your place, it's God's love for all of us, no matter where we are or where we have been. And his love is there for us. His love, and then what I love in the scripture that it says, is that he did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. What he's saying is that his intentions are not to judge anyone. He doesn't want to judge anyone. That's how I see that and I understand that, is that he didn't come to judge, but to save. He came to save with his love. It was not through his love that we'll get judgment. It's through his love that we'll be pardoned from our sin. We'll be pardoned and forgiven for our transgressions, everything we've done wrong, the way that we live, the way that we talk, the way that we act, the things we look at online. He will forgive those if we ask. But it's only by God's love that any of that can happen. And when I say that, it's our job to reach, but it's God's job to redeem and to revive. To be able to redeem is through God's love. It's nothing else will redeem us. As I know I mentioned it a little bit last week, but you can't be redeemed by works. No matter how good of a person you are, how much money you give, how many mission trips you go on, if it's not through God's love, it's nothing. It's worthless. It makes no difference. Because it's not through work that we're saved. You serve God And if you do those things, you serve God through the love, but not through, this is what I have to do to get to heaven. Because it's not. None of us will be given through that. None of us will be saved through that. So we have to be able to share God's love. So if you're a Christian, if this is your church, if this is not your church and you're a Christian, you're from somewhere else, it's your job to share God's love. It's not just a Branson thing or a here thing or a there thing, but all across the world, Christians should be sharing God's love. Because that's the best thing we have to share, right? I can't help you with loneliness. I mean, I could be a friend, but there's times when I can't be there as a friend. Even as a pastor, I can't be there all the time. I can't help you with where you are in your life. I may be able to, refer you to a job or point you to a place, but I can't change that. But God's love can. He can guide us. He can lead us. He can show us. So, a number that I want you guys to understand and see here is this next number. We're part of the Nazarene Church, and within our denomination, they have a really awesome research department. Before we moved here in March into our own building here, I asked them to pull the data for this location just within 3 miles. So I said that there's a little over 27,000 people within 3 miles. How many of those do you think are people who are not Christians? We're in Branson, right? I mean, we're in like the Christian capital of the Midwest. Anyone want to share an idea? What do you think? Who thinks it is more than a half are Christians? We got one? Anyone else? More than a third who are Christians? We got a couple? Who thinks it's less than a third? Does everyone else think it's less than a third who are Christians? All right, so the number is, it's 27,000, and it changes every day. So the last time it was updated, it was 27,800. Out of those, the people who are considered unchurched, as they put it in their documentation, it's unclaimed. It means they do not have a home church, and they do not claim a religious affiliation. That number, 17,113 people within 3 miles of here. When me and Kristen talked about starting a church here, because we felt God calling us to start a church here, you know what the number one thing we always heard from people was? Branson doesn't need another church. That was one of the things we heard. The other one is, everyone's a Christian in Branson. And 17,113 people within 3 miles. And if that number, and it is about the same, if you go to the 10-mile radius, it's actually about 60,000 people, and that number is 38,000 within 10 miles. But I chose the 3-mile number for a few reasons. One, 3 miles is not too far to drive, or to even walk, really. I've walked 3 miles, not on a regular basis, but I've walked 3 miles. But 3 miles is close enough that we can find a way to get there. And plus, Branson 3 miles is different than where I grew up in Seymour. It's different than 3 miles in Seymour. 3 miles in Seymour is about 180 seconds. That's how long it takes to drive it, because it's highway and 60-mile-an-hour back roads. Branson 3 miles is, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. So it's within a commutable distance. But that number is important because, as we were told, we don't need another church in Branson. Everyone's saved in Branson. We had a district superintendent who's now the director of evangelism, who says the only number that God cares about is 0. He said, when everyone's saved in your town and this number is 0, you can close the church. He's like, your job's done. You can close then. But it's 0. So I think that's where this series is going to be coming from. It's focusing on each one, reach one. Excuse me. But each one, reach one is something that we're able to look at. And it's through sharing God's love. It's through sharing our purpose. It's fulfilling the mission of the church globally, the mission of the church locally, to reach people with God's love. And I think most of us would agree that reaching one person is not too many. I can talk to a lot of people, but But if we're all talking to people, it makes a lot bigger difference. Because it's not about growing this church. It's not about, making stairs full. It's not about, filling up this or doing this or that. But it's about reaching people with the love of God so they know Jesus. Because it says that those who do not know Jesus, those that do not come to the light, those that stay away from the light, they will be judged. They will receive judgment. And it's not something that any of us can change. But we can give an opportunity. And if there's 80% of people who say that they would come to church if they were invited, people would come to church if they knew someone there, isn't it our job to be that person? It's our job to tell, it's our job to talk, it's our job to be real. And I don't mean we put on a happy face every day and everything's perfect and everything's go-lucky, but be real. Because so much of the time growing up, I felt like Christians a lot of times seemed fake. Because when you come to church, it's like, well, how is this week? God's good. And how, glory to God, and then hallelujah, and then, people are shouting during a service, but then, they're drinking on Saturday night, and they're getting drunk, and they're abusive, and they're watching whatever they want on TV, and their kids are terrible people. And you're like, it just felt so fake. So I'm not telling you to be fake and come into the church or leave the church and act differently because you're trying to share Jesus, but be real. Because I promise you, if you're fake, no matter how much you think you are fooling people, you're not. You may be able to fool yourself, but you will not fool everyone. And it just comes across ungenuine. For me, I know that there are things that I have an advantage over that other people don't. Like, I know I am more comfortable talking to total strangers. I would talk to a wall. It would be nothing new. That's okay. But that doesn't mean you have to take on my personality to do it well. What it means is that if you want to take on the personality of someone else, it looks fake. So you be yourself, you be real. If it's through friendship and you tell people who aren't Christians, this is what we do, or people who are Christians and maybe their life doesn't align to yours, or maybe you have different lifestyles, but it's still good to grow. Proverbs says iron sharpens iron. I have a lot of friends who are different denominations and different churches and different states and different backgrounds. And it's fun because we battle different issues. But we all agree on this issue, though. It's each one reach one. So out of those 17,000 people, if we just took that number statistically is shown to have a higher rate of feeling lonely. My generation is actually the worst in loneliness, and I can tell you why. Right here. Millennials, generation, and the generations after us, Generation Z, have the greatest amount of loneliness. They would actually claim about 20 to 30% higher than previous generations. We were at Silver Dollar City yesterday, and as we're there's a lot of people who are about my age. For those that don't know, me and my wife are having a baby in January, so I'm watching people with their kids. And 9 times out of 10, we'd walk past someone and their kid would be kind of running around in front of them, they'd be sitting there like this. And that's common. People from my generation don't like phone calls that often. We don't make phone calls. When was the last phone call you made, Luke? No? Landon, what's the last phone call you made? Yesterday? Hey! If it weren't for church phone calls or calling like family, I probably wouldn't call anyone. If I want to talk to my friends, text message. And that's what's causing our generation to feel lonely, because you don't have any real interaction. So if you think that because you're younger or because you're older or because this person's younger or older, that they're going to be less susceptible to you, it's not true. My generation, generations that are more seasoned than mine, all struggle with the same things. Loneliness occurs differently, though, for a 20-year-old than it does for a 60-year-old. In Branson, one of the reasons that a lot of people would feel loneliness here is that this can be part of a retirement community in ways. So you move away from your family, you're in Branson by yourself, it's easy to feel lonely because you don't have the family, the friends. Me and Kristen, when we moved here, we didn't know people here, so it was different for us. We grew up in a small town where I couldn't walk across the street illegally without, my grandma, my grandpa, and my cousins and aunts and uncles all knowing what had happened. But for us, here in Branson, in our church, we have the chance to battle loneliness. We have a chance to battle depression. We have a chance to battle against the sins and the things that hold on to us. Because I think we only think of sin as murder and adultery. But the things that capture our life and they keep us in this little bubble that's afraid to do anything, we may not call them sin, but those are sins. Because if they keep us from God, they keep us separated from God. Because I promise you, God does not want us to feel loneliness. Do you think He wants us to feel depression, anxiety, stress, all those things that we feel? I don't think God wants us to live in fear constantly. That's work that the devil does through us and allows through us, and it's part of our human nature that we have to fight sometimes. And I'm not saying that I don't think there's real medical conditions that are within those categories that can be addressed through medical doctors and physicians. But I'm saying that there are things that we can do to address those as people and as churches. If you are struggling with lying, with cheating, with looking at others with lust, with looking at pornography, with doing drugs, alcohol, addictions, things that you feel like you can't control and you can't break free, you can. And it's the church's job to help bring you to the altar. It's the church's job to help bring you to Jesus. I ask if everyone will stand with me. And no one looking around, no one peeking, everyone with their eyes closed, heads bowed. If you do not know Jesus in the way that I've talked about him, if you don't know Jesus' love, but you know his judgment, I invite you to come to the altar and pray. If you're struggling with any sin in your life, if you're struggling and it's holding on to you, you've tried and you've tried and you've tried to break it and it's holding on to you, I invite you to pray this morning and break the